believed his body was a leaky vessel dot. At first, it was just one pinprick on his arm. A tiny mouth opening where skin should have been loyal and sealed. He stared at it with the offended focus of a man who expects better craftsmanship from the universe. Things were not supposed to come undone like that. So he did what made sense to him. He filled the hole. Relief followed warm, bright, persuasive relief, and within a feeling that he had outsmarted entropy. The world sharpened. His thoughts lined up like soldiers. The hole closed, or seemed to. Problem solved. Then another appeared. On his thigh this time. He didn't remember making it. He resented the implication. Someone else must be doing this to him. Some quiet saboteur with a steady hand and a cruel sense of humor. Again, he filled the hole. Again, relief. Again, the sense that he was winning. The holes multiplied. They showed up overnight. During conversations, between blinks. He'd catch sight of one and feel the same surge of panic a homeowner feels spotting water damage creeping up a wall. You don't ask where the water came from. You patch. You seal. You keep the house standing, Dot, so he patched. And patched. And patched, Dot, each fix demanded another. Each moment of clarity narrowed the frame of his thinking until only one rule remained. Holes meant danger, and filling them meant safety. When he tried to remember when his hands had started trembling, when sleep had become an old rumor, his thoughts slipped sideways and dissolved. Memory itself seemed full of holes. Mirrors became hostile witnesses. He avoided them, then smashed them, then apologized to the shards because they looked like more openings, more mouths accusing him of neglect. His body no longer felt like a body. It was a map of threats, ASIB. A thing always on the verge of spilling itself out onto the floor, sometimes briefly. Terribly, another thought intruded. What if I'm the one making them? The idea felt obscene. He rejected it with practiced speed. Blame had to live outside him. Otherwise, the math collapsed. Otherwise, there was no remedy, and all Dot the despair came quietly. Not as fear, but as exhaustion. He sat on the edge of his bed, counting the places he could feel wrongness under his skin, knowing the count would change before he finished. The solution that once felt ingenious now felt mandatory, mechanical, joyless. There was no triumph left in it. Only duty. Dot by the end, he wasn't trying to fix himself anymore. He was just responding. Hold fill. Hold fill. A ritual stripped of meaning. Performed by a man who could no longer remember what an unbroken body felt like, or whether it had ever existed somewhere deep, beneath the noise and the certainty. The truth waited. There had never been an enemy but his own hands, guided by a mind that had turned against itself. But that truth required a kind of stillness he could no longer tolerate. Stillness felt like another hole. He decided the body was a container, and he was the spill. This conclusion did not arrive all at once. It took time, the way rust takes time. working him from the edges until the center realizes too late that it has already been claimed. He had once believed in simple things. Skin stays where it is placed. Thoughts obey the traffic laws of logic. The face in the mirror keeps its promises. Then the first absence appeared. It was not pain that drew his attention, but the idea of it, a sensation of draft, where there should have been closure, a wrongness both physical and philosophical. He prodded at the feeling with the fascinated horror of a man discovering a crack in the foundation of his home. The body, he thought, was supposed to be finished. This one wasn't. It leaked. He came upon a solution that felt, in its way, elegant. You fill what's empty. You stop the leak. The mind, once it decides something is true, can become a tyrant with impeccable manners for a time. The solution worked. A brief hush fell over the constant hum of dread. Colors behaved. Corners stopped moving when he looked away. The fragile architecture of his thinking stood upright, proud as a child's sandcastle holding against the first wave. Then new absences appeared. They showed up in unlikely places. A shoulder, a shadowed place near the ribs, sometimes everywhere at once. Like stars you can see only if you don't look directly at them. He could not remember how they began. His memory had become a hallway full of doors that opened onto other hallways. When he tried to backtrack, the floor rearranged itself. Someone was doing this to him. He decided that someone acquired many names. The neighbors. The invisible ones between the walls. The version of him that came out when he slept. He followed clues that weren't there with the seriousness of a detective in a dream. A sound in the pipes was a plot. A misplaced glass was evidence. His own reflection was an accomplice who refused to testify. He patched the new absences with the only thing that had ever seemed to work. Relief came again, but thinner, like a promise repeated once too often. It writhed with strings. His thoughts accelerated beyond steering. They became a weather system, lightning without rain. Time collapsed into a perpetual now that devoured before and after. Language frayed. His mind rearranged into mosaics that were beautiful for a second and then unbearable to look at. The absences multiplied with the kind of sick logic as reality. Insulted by his attempts at repair, had decided to participate. He woke with the conviction that he was being whittled down by unseen hands. He slept less, then barely, then not at all, living in a stretched moment where the clocks only pretended to move. There were intervals of clarity, but they came with a price. In those moments he sensed a terrible symmetry. The fixer and the breaker shared the same hands. The idea approached him like an animal he didn't want to scare. He pushed it away. To accept it would mean dismantling the entire story that allowed him to keep going. It would mean standing unprotected in the open air of the real. He preferred the workshop of delusion, where cause and effect could be negotiated. The world began talking to him in codes. Streetlights blinked in sentences. A radio 2 apartments away was aimed directly at him, its messages wrapped in songs he didn't know. A stranger's cough contained instructions. His own heartbeat was a Morse signal, stressing urgency, urgency, urgency. He walked through rooms like a man moving through a crime scene, aware that he was both witness and suspect. Unable to say which frightened him more, the absences were everywhere now, if not in the flesh, then in the shape of his days. Conversations had holes. Memories had edges chewed thin. Meaning seeped out of formerly solid words. Friend, home, tomorrow. He had the sensation of living behind himself. Watching a person with his name move through a life that had grown to large and to loud. He filled. Because filling had become not just a solution, but an identity. A caretaker of leaks. A custodian of the failing vessel. He performed the ritual without joy or hesitation. The act no longer promised happiness. It promised only a reduction of panic, a temporary ceasefire inside his skull. It was enough. It had to be on one late hour that felt like the end of the calendar. He caught sight of himself in the black glass of a window. Not a mirrors, he had learned to distrust but a city at night, holding his shape loosely on its surface. He saw not a man, but a constellation of gaps, a figure outlined by what was missing. The realization did not arrive as a thought. It arrived as gravity. He was not leaking. He was being hollowed. And the tools he used to repair were the same tools that carved, for an instant, almost mercifully. The noise dropped out. In the quiet, the truth stepped forward, hesitant but undeniable. There was no saboteur. There was only illness, sitting where reason used to sit, wearing his voice, guiding his hands. The absences were not doors that others opened. They were circles he had traced in the fog of madness, forgetting each time that he had been there before. Despair came not as drama, but as weight. He sat down on the floor because upright seemed like an arrogant posture for a man who could no longer trust the boundaries of his own skin. He did not cry. The machinery for crying had been dismantled weeks ago. He simply understood in a clear, terrible way that the map of his body and the map of his mind now shared the same error. Both were convinced they could be fixed by the very thing that was breaking them. He closed his eyes and listened to the vast, busy silence inside him. Behind it, faintly, lived a smaller sound he had been avoiding, the part of him that still wanted rescue. The stubborn mammal instinct that looks for hands, for light, for the ordinary miracle of another nervous system saying, "Stay dot, it was not redemption. It was not even hope. It was simply the recognition that there existed, somewhere outside the closed circuit of compulsion and delusion, a world in which holes are not destiny and a body is not a battlefield." The thought frightened him more than the darkness had. Still, it remained a thin line on the horizon, not a solution, a direction he felt perforated in ways that had nothing to do with flesh. His attention had holes entire minutes fell through him without landing anywhere. His emotions had holes grief would begin and then simply vanish as if it had slipped down a drain. His sense of self had holes he would reach for eye and come back with static. He was convinced he was becoming more complete. The substance inside him no longer felt like something he used. It felt like what he was made of now, a replacement material. A luminous filler injected into every absence. His thoughts no longer moved in lines, but in bursts, ricocheting from idea to idea with the conviction of revelation. Everything connected. Everything mattered. Everything explained everything else. He interpreted the intensity as proof of health. When new holes appeared, and they appeared constantly, now he no longer reacted with alarm. He reacted with gratitude. Holes meant capacity. Holes meant room for more. He had begun to think of himself as an upgradable structure, a being designed to be expanded past ordinary limits. Other people were sealed systems, stagnant and closed. He was porous. He was advanced. The filling spread everywhere. It colonized his language, which became bright and strange, sentences looping back on themselves, meaning flashing and disappearing like bioluminescent fish. It colonized time. Hours collapsed into seconds, then stretched into eternities. It colonized his eternities until sensations lost their labels, heat, urgency, brilliance, pressure, significance, all blended into a single roaring yes. He stopped sleeping because sleep felt like leakage. He stopped eating because food felt irrelevant. He stopped listening to anyone who spoke slowly, cautiously, skeptically. Slowness felt like rot. Doubt felt like sabotage. He was riddled with holes now, but he didn't experience himself as empty. He experienced himself as overfull, swollen with purpose, vibrating with insight. The paradox did not bother him. Contradictions felt elegant. If something made sense and didn't make sense, that only meant it was important, occasionally, rarely. Dangerously, he'd sense how much of him was missing. Not physically missing, but functionally gone. Patience, continuity, the ability to stop. These were not dramatic losses. They were quiet ones, the way a language dies when children stop learning it. When those moments came, panic threatened. The idea that he was dissolving rather than evolving brushed against him like cold air. He responded automatically, more filling, more intensity, more certainty. The system corrected itself. The panic evaporated into brilliance. Stopped by the end. The holes had multiplied beyond counting. They overlapped. They connected. They formed a latticework of absence through which his thoughts screamed at full volume. There was no longer a clear boundary between repair and damage. Everything he did felt simultaneously necessary and catastrophic. He could no longer tell. Where he ended, he felt less like a man and more like a condition. The universe was briefly experimenting with a proof of concept for what happens when meaning outruns structure. He was not falling apart. He insisted. He was transcending containment. Ordinary minds couldn't survive this level of openness. He could, but even delusion as physics, the brilliance began to thin. The insights repeated themselves. The urgency ran out of places to go. What remained was a body and mind riddled with absence, kept upright by sheer chemical insistence. Like a building whose lights are still on long after the tenants have left. In a moment of terrifying clarity, he realized the truth he had been outrunning. The holes were not being filled. They were being outlined, illuminated, made impossible to ignore. The substance didn't repair the gaps, it made them glow, made them feel profound, made them demand more of themselves. He wasn't becoming whole, he was becoming a feedback loop. And somewhere beneath the roar, beneath the certainty, beneath the chemical thunder, there was a smaller, older part of him that remembered what wholeness actually felt like. It remembered limits. It remembered rest. It remembered being held together not by intensity, but by time, by care, by other people. That memory did not save him, but it did one quiet, important thing. It proved the holes were not destiny. They were damage. And damage, unlike destiny, has an outside. I'm going to say this plainly, because it matters. This is heavy material, and it echoes real suffering. If any of this overlaps with your own life or urges, you deserve help that exists outside fiction. Support isn't weakness or surrender, it's interruption. An interruption is sometimes the only thing that stops a loop from eating the person inside it. I'm going to do this as a surreal allegory, not a how-to, not a fetishized spectacle. The horror stays existential. The drug becomes symbol, not instruction. What follows is about identity being consumed, not bodies being used out at some point. The distinction stopped mattering. He no longer thought I am full of it. He thought I am. The holes had multiplied until there was no uninterrupted surface. Left no stable place to stand and say this is me. What remained was intensity without a container, urgency without a reason, brilliance without a thinker. His thoughts no longer originated. They occurred like sparks jumping between exposed wires. He noticed distantly that people looked at him differently now, not with concern, not with fear, not with appraisal. They leaned in when he spoke. They stayed too close. They listened not for meaning, but for effect. His presence did something to them. He made rooms louder, faster, hungrier. People left conversations with him vibrating. Convinced they touched something essential. Vibrating. Convinced they touched something essential. Someone said, half joking, "You're like pure energy." The idea landed and never left. He stopped thinking of himself as a person and started thinking of himself as a medium, a concentrate, a delivery system, a solution to other people's emptiness. The holes in him weren't flaws anymore. They were access points, ways in. People began to take pieces of him, not literally, not at first. They took his time until there was none left. They took his words and repeated them louder than he ever could. They took his mania and mistook it for wisdom, his compulsion for courage, his unraveling for revelation. They wanted what he radiated, not what he was. Eventually, even the metaphor collapsed out in his mind. He had fully crossed the boundary. He was no longer flesh pretending to be fuel. He was fuel that had once worn flesh. He imagined himself breaking down into usable forms, powdered thought, vaporized certainty, liquid urgency, each version of him designed to enter others quickly and leave nothing behind. But craving. People approached him with need written all over them. They didn't say his name anymore. They said what he could do to them. He imagined them trying to absorb him every way possible. Desperate to feel what he felt, convinced it would fix him. He watched himself dissolve in their hands, their mouths, their rituals, until nothing recognizable remained. Each person took a version of him and left emptier than before. Furious that the effect never lasted, and what was left of him felt a terrible, hollow pride. He was being used. That meant he mattered not, but the truth, sharp and unavoidable, finally asserted itself, becoming something everyone consumes does not make you infinite. It makes you finite faster. Every act of ingestion erased him a little more. Every attempt to turn him into relief converted him into absence, stop by the end. He was everywhere and nowhere diffused across other people's needs and now unremembered. Function without identity. There was no core left to return to. No body. No boundary. Just residue and legend and a persistent ache where a self had once insisted on existing. In the final quiet, because even madness burns out one last understanding surfaced. He hadn't become powerful. He had become extractable. And extraction is not transcendence. It is disappearance. Repeated until there is nothing left to take.